Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session. On behalf of everyone at Rev.io, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. Before we begin the presentation, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items. First, audio will automatically come in through your computer speakers. However, if you're having trouble using your speakers or unhappy with the quality of the sound, you can also dial in via the phone number and access code listed on the screen. A recorded version of this webinar will be emailed to you within 2 weeks and available for on-demand access from the Rev.io website. For those of you just joining us, welcome. Today, our guest speakers from GSA will be discussing the current state of taxation and proven strategies for liability reduction. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers. Joe Solana is the president and COO and a founding member of GSA. Joe's primary function is the ongoing management of operations. He majored in accounting and received his MBA from Nova Southeastern University in May 1993. Since the early 90s, Joe has worked in various accounting and finance roles from accounting manager to chief financial officer. As a professional, Joe has achieved success working for worldwide firms such as Philips Electronics and Royal 10 Kate, as well as for national telecommunications firms such as ILD Holdings and IDT, culminating with the co-founding of GSA in 2001. Beth Brandenstein serves as Vice President of Compliance Operations for Global Strategic Accountants. Beth has been with GSA, leading the tax and FCC and state regulatory compliance groups since 2010. Beth oversees the compliance and tax departments and plays an integral role in new client intake and onboarding, SOC audit management, overseeing new service expansion, maintaining customer satisfaction, federal and state level audit work, general project consulting, and new employee training. Matt LaHood is the CEO for GSA and its parent company. Matt has held this position for over 13 years. Prior to founding GSA, Matt developed and managed telecommunications strategies for hundreds of companies from mid-size to Fortune 500. Zach LaHood, a CPA, serves as the treasurer for Global Strategic Accountants and leads the Treasury Department. Prior to joining GSA, Zach worked for a public accounting firm in providing assurance services to clients in several industries with an emphasis on commercial businesses and financial institutions. Zach may not be able to join us today as planned, as he just recently had a baby, and so we might not actually hear from him today. Samantha McKayo serves as Executive Vice President of Professional and Corporate Services for GSA. She serves clients in a high-level regulatory and tax research and advocate role. Samantha joined GSA in early 2014 and has since been instrumental in leading the GSA consulting department to new heights of business excellence. Last but not least, Sam Allen serves as the Senior Regulatory Advisor for GSA, helping lead the compliance department. He has been with GSA working in both the tax and FCC state regulatory compliance groups since 2014. On behalf of everyone at Rev.io, I'd like to thank you all for being here today. And now I'd like to turn it over to Joe and the rest of our experts from GSA.
Thank you, Olivia, and welcome to our webinar on taxation and liability reduction. GSA is excited to share with both GSA and Rev.io clients information regarding this important topic, and we certainly hope that it will be informative and useful to all of you and that you'll have lots of great questions for our very experienced team to answer. The communications industry is a dynamic, ever-changing world of possibilities. You as a carrier or potential carrier want to offer your customers the latest solutions and superior service while growing your bottom line. But you must question, what about regulatory rules and tax obligations? Do they fall on you or your carriers? How do you come up with a tax policy that's optimized and defensible in an audit? questions like these are many and answers may be fuzzy. As a leading regulatory and tax consulting and compliance firm, we have helped hundreds of companies answer these types of questions and put them on a path of optimal compliance practices. And we're hoping that today we'll be able to accomplish that with our viewers. GSA and Rev.io have been partnered for many years, and as a result of that partnership, we share and service more than 300 carriers across the U.S. and internationally. This webinar today will focus on 3 specific topics: the FCC and the Universal Service Fund, tax compliance best practices, reducing risk in an audit. Hopefully, when we are through with these topics, you will be well versed in understanding how accurate billing utilizing a platform like Rev.io and accurate and complete tax policies provided to you by GSA can provide impact to your bottom line. This can happen simply by reduction in penalties and interest, but more importantly, by avoiding large unexpected audit adjustments. Finally, and more importantly, Rev.io and GSA work together tirelessly with you in establishing accurate billing and tax policies to support M&A activity. And in the telecom space, the most important question asked during due diligence is whether the acquisition target is compliant. So it's very important to be able to answer that in a positive way. So with that said, I am pleased to introduce you to Beth Brandenstein. She is GSA's VP of Compliance Operations, and she'll start off the webinar by speaking about FCC and Universal Service Fund.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you, Joe, and everyone, and thank you for joining the webinar. I'm Beth Brandenstein, VP of Compliance Operations, and I've been with GSA from about the beginning and have constructed our regulatory compliance department from the ground up. Most carriers don't like the regulatory aspect of the telecom industry, but we live and breathe this stuff every day, and I actually love my job and enjoy passing on the knowledge of regulatory to our clients so they are well informed to make those important business decisions and to remain compliant. Today, I'm excited to share with you some important regulatory updates from both the FCC and the state regulatory sides. First, USAC has announced that an online portal for the monthly invoices is coming the second quarter of this year. Very important key factors for this change are that USAC will no longer accept checks or wire payments. Payments will be made through the USAC's e-file site. The USAC e-file site is going to be modified for payments to be processed through the U.S. Treasury Pay.gov system. USAC will now only accept ACH payment from your bank and/or a credit or debit card. This change in payment processing creates a more seamless and quicker process for GSA to make this payment on behalf of our clients, and we're very excited about it. The second update at the FCC level is the reinstatement of the Customer Proprietary Network Information, or CP&I, this year after a one-year hiatus during the 2017 calendar year. This action follows the congressional repeal of the FCC's 2016 privacy order that had extended CP&I regulations to broadband internet access services. As a result, telecom and VoIP providers must again file the CP&I compliance certification, and the reinstated CP&I regulations will not cover broadband internet access services. Lastly, on the state level regulatory front, more and more states are requiring VoIP providers to report and contribute to state level Universal Service Funds, NTRS funds. Most recently is the Oregon Residential Service Protection Fund requiring VoIP providers to begin contributing beginning January 1st, 2018. GSA is always monitoring these changes and making the changes to keep our clients compliant. I would like now to introduce you to Sam Allen, our Senior Regulatory Advisor, who is going to talk about the great things that GSA is doing on traffic study projects. Sam?
Thank you, Beth. And hello, everyone, for joining us here today. I would like to thank you all for taking the time out of your busy afternoons. I would also like to thank Beth and GSA as well for giving me this platform, because we are very excited to be talking about this whole traffic study with you this afternoon. Now, in our experience, we have noticed a few common misconceptions when it comes to carriers and their use of traffic studies, or just their lack thereof. Now, one thing we have noticed is that most carriers do not update their records. Now, that's what I mean by that is they use old data to file. And so they would use records from 2015, 2014, and sometimes as early as 2016. But a common misconception is that you can actually file a traffic study up to 4 times a year with USAC. Now, we know that you probably shouldn't update 4 times a year, because what is routine for one carrier may not be routine for another. However, with that said, at the very least, at least 1 time a year, you should always go back and look at your records to make sure that what you are claiming as accessible revenue is what you are filing. Because USAC can go back, again, for your a full year at any time and audit. And that leads us to our third point, which if you allow GSA to file these on your behalf, we will have defensible evidence. Again, now what we have also seen when we get clients who have a traffic study is they have half-baked studies. Now what I mean by that is they ballpark their figures. Last time I checked in the 2017 FCC guidelines, ballpark is not accepted when it comes to these figures. So again, as you see here, we will document the evidence with defensible work. We will make sure that we have everything stored away properly and that it's always easily accessible. We will also give you a determination on these benefits, why you should use this study. And then, of course, at any time that USAC wants to come back, we have it ready. And we will also send it, because now they have changed it to where anytime you send a traffic study, it must be sent with that corresponding 499. So if you send it quarterly, it has to go with that Q file. If you send it annually, it always goes with the annual file. And in the next slide, we will see how it confers with your billing platform. Now, whether you use Avalara, SureTax, or Vertex, we here at GSA, it doesn't matter to us. Now, one of my sole responsibilities when it comes to completing these studies is to make sure that it is properly implemented into your billing system. Again, another huge error that we see is when carriers do get these studies, it is not accurately put into this system. So what I mean by that is what you file as your assessable revenue is not what your billing records actually show that you collected. Now again, if there's ever a moment where you get an audit from USAC, negative, not going to work. So again, my responsibility will be to make sure, as we see for the second slide here, that it is being sent to all accessible products. Now, what I mean by that is if you have this study, you don't perform these rates on, let's say, equipment, headsets, phones. Again, because the traffic study is only for voice accessible revenues. And then, of course, lastly, I'm going to make sure that whatever is being passed through the data matches what we file. Again, so it all loops back to if USAC ever wants to ask or inquire about these accessible revenues that we're reporting, we have all the defensible evidence. Everything ties back. Now, without further ado, I would like to pass it to our Executive Vice President, Samantha.
Thank you, Sam. That was very well done, Sam. And just so everyone that is listening understands, Sam is Samuel, and he works for our company, and I am Samantha, and we are not the same person. However, that always gets confused. But he's a great person to be compared to, so I'm okay with that. I would like to just start off by mentioning something exciting. So April 1st is coming up, and I don't know if everyone's aware, but that's the due date of the 499A. It is also Easter this year, and it is April Fool's Day and my daughter's second birthday. So let's all keep that very important date in mind as we go through the presentation. I'm going to be talking to you about best practices for tax compliance or tax policy. And what's important with the best practice is really to know your requirements. And when I think about requirements, I think about the who, the what, the when, the where. Who are you paying? What are you paying? When are you paying it? And where is it being paid? Maybe in your case, you're outsourcing it to someone like GSA. And if that's the case, you don't really have to worry that much about it. It's also very important to know where the data comes from and how it's being handled. That's really the what. What's going on with what you're selling? Identify an internal resource responsible for documenting source data, tax policy, and filing artifacts. That's the real crucial part. That's the why. That's what Samuel was talking about when he said, make sure that your books and records can hold up in terms of an audit. Perform a review with your tax compliance and product teams on a frequency that is comfortable. If you have a lot of change, you're going to want to do that more often. And this is really where a large number of my teammates come in. We're specifically responsible for OSS, BSS rules. And people, when we say that, they just get overwhelmed. They're like, oh, what do you mean? Well, it really is nothing more than your tax policy rules. How does tax policy impact your billing and rating? The last part of this best practices is knowing where your exemptions are for any wholesale services and sales. The reason that's so important is when it comes to audit, which will be covered just a little bit later by Joe Solana, it's very, very important that you have all exempted transactions documented by proper requirements and certification forms that are required by the tax authority or the FCC. Why this is so important is because from an auditor's perspective, as all of my old bosses would always tell me, this is low-hanging fruit. So it's the first thing that the auditors are going to go after in terms of an assessment. It's also very important for you as a carrier that you understand who you should be issuing exemptions to. We have a whole department here that does nothing but tell you that exact answer. And the reason that's so important is because that's direct revenue to your bottom line. If you're paying taxes in two places, that is taking away from money you could be using to really go out into the marketplace and make your business what it should be. Next, I'm going to talk about liability reduction tips, or optimizations, as we like to call them. There's really three optimizations that we like to focus on. And you may say, well, why would I want to focus on an optimization? The reason is because an optimization can ensure that your tax rate on the services could go from anywhere around 35% all the way down to 18%. These optimizations include things like unbundling, cost recovery fees, and traffic studies. Now I'm going to go in depth into each one of these. For unbundling, we're talking about really breaking apart the services that you're selling into the underlying component parts. And no one really likes it when I make this comparison because I'm the only one here that loves McDonald's. But I'm going to refer to an extra value meal because it helps me to think about it. When you go through McDonald's and you get your extra value meal, you get your Big Mac, your fries, and your Coke, that is really a bundle. You're getting three different things for one price. And that's really what we're talking about when we talk about unbundling. We're taking those elements like voice, text, and data, we're breaking them apart. And maybe 1/3 is attributable to each one of those from a cost perspective. But associating those values will help ensure that your tax rate really does reflect the taxable component, which is the voice assessable portion in most states. Cost recovery fees are growing in popularity. It really is a recoverable just allowed by the FCC for reasonable expenses associated with telecom service provisioning. There is a lot of confusion in the marketplace about recovery fees, and that's why we spend a significant amount of our time here at GSA helping our clients understand why recovery fees are so important. We have very in-depth studies to help develop these cost recovery fees. These can include looking at competitors and what they're charging on various different fees. There is much nomenclature in the marketplace associated with these recovery fees, which can make it even more confusing from both a carrier and a customer standpoint. So if we are working on a cost recovery fee consulting agreement, we will spend the adequate amount of time necessary to ensure that you and your customers understand exactly what you are adding to your bill. The last optimization was covered by Samuel earlier, and that is a traffic study. And Samuel went in depth into how the traffic study is performed and documented. However, I just want to make sure that everyone listening understands that a traffic study from a high-level perspective is really just looking at the call flow. What's interstate, what's intrastate, what's international, and then what's really accessible for USF. Is that safe harbor that the USF has deemed attractive really attractive to you? Or would it be more important for you to look at the traffic study and figure out that perhaps only 30% of your traffic is accessible for USF, not 64.9% for VoIP? That's where the traffic study plays such an important part and can ensure that dollars are added to the bottom line. Now I will turn it back over to our president, Joe Solana, to talk about audits.
Thank you, Samantha. That was very informative. So in the next couple of slides, what I'd like to do is maybe connect the dots on what you've been hearing from Samantha and Samuel and Beth as far as different approaches and different methodologies. The best way to do that is to talk about some of the audit issues that you may have, and hopefully you can realize that the things that they're talking about, while complicated, are things that are sustainable for you as a business and can help you in the situation of being in an audit with the jurisdiction, whether it's USAC or one of the lower level jurisdictions. So the first thing I want to mention is consistency. And Samantha used a McDonald's analogy, and I was actually in another webinar at a conference I'm at today, and a gentleman there gave a McDonald's analogy, so I'm going to use it here as well. He talked about the fact that at McDonald's, you don't go to McDonald's because you know that McDonald's has the best hamburgers in the world. You go to McDonald's because you know that every McDonald's you go to, you're going to get the exact same hamburger and the exact same French fries at those restaurants, because they've built a process and a methodology that allows investors to put millions of dollars into a store and then turn it over to teenagers to run. So let's talk about consistency. So when you're doing your regulatory and compliance, one of the most important things is that you do not raise flags with any of the regulatory bodies. And really what that falls into is consistency. So you want to be sure that all of your filings are done timely, are done in the same general way, and are done accurately. And that includes the filing method. Don't switch filing methods. Don't do paper returns one time and then do electronic returns another. Those kind of changes can cause issues and red flags at the jurisdictions and raise that audit flag potentially. One of the things we pride ourselves on at GSA is the consistency of what we do for our clients, and as well with Rev.io in their billing platform. Extremely consistent and very, very detailed. Secondly, you want to be able to be sure that you're going to defend your approach completely. What I mean by approach is exactly what Sam and Beth and Samantha have been speaking of today, is all of those methodologies of unbundling and traffic studies and optimizations are all great, but as Samuel said, you can't just make it up, right? You have to have some documentation behind it and be ready to defend it. In our experience of doing hundreds of audits for our clients, we find that about 60% of all the audits could have been avoided by rapid responses that are defensible. What does that mean? That means simply that you want to be able at any time to be prepared to defend that methodology, that traffic study, and answer the auditors quickly and concisely. If the auditors feel like you can't answer a question, then they're going to think that maybe you don't really have everything prepared correctly and that you could be making something up or not being able to support it effectively. So we work with our clients in conjunction with Rev.io to be sure that all of that background information is created in Rev.io as a billing platform, in the tax engine from a tax policy and consistency basis, so that when an audit occurs, and it will occur for whatever the reason may be, you'll be able to put all the pieces of the puzzle together correctly. Keeping accurate records and being ready to use them as a resource involves both Rev.io, GSA, and you as the client. GSA is going to keep all of your historical information that was used to create filings. We're going to keep all of the documentation to support your methodologies for optimization and traffic study. Rev.io is going to keep all of your billing records. But at the end of the day, a lot of it falls back on you, the carrier, to be sure to tie all those pieces together back to your books and records, your financial statements, and your trial balances. Maintaining accurate exemption certificates is, for a wholesale carrier or an aggregator carrier, probably the most important thing you need to worry about. Samantha leads our exemption management program and team, and they are tasked with being sure that if you're a wholesale aggregator type carrier, that you are collecting proper exemption certificates from your clients to be sure that in the instance of the client being audited, that potential liability cannot flow upstream to you as a carrier. Very, very important, especially in an audit. And then, of course, once those exemption certificates are created by Samantha and her team, those need to be put in play in Rev.io and the tax engine to be sure that the billing records are supporting the books and records behind the scene. Now let's talk a little bit about reducing risks for an audit. I gave you a little background on what are the key drivers. So in terms of reducing your exposure, obviously the most important thing behind reducing the audit exposure is, how do I get to a point in a very economical and timely fashion to feel like I'm comfortable with what I'm doing in my billing platform, my tax engine, et cetera. So we try to get our clients, especially when they're using a system like Rev.io, to do a self-review. And what that simply means is you want to be able to tick and tie all the books and records. You want to be sure that the flow of the data that goes from your quoting systems to your billing platform to your invoicing to the engine is all tied out. And tied out means that it ties out to what data you give to GSA for your filings, what data you give to your CPA to do your tax returns, and what is used by your internal accounting people to create your financial statements. So that self-review is extremely important. If you don't get anything else out of this session, you need to talk to GSA and Rev.io about doing a self-review. Secondly, you want to be sure that, as I mentioned earlier, all the supporting documents are readily available and can be easily and quickly provided to the auditor. I can't tell you how many times I go back to auditors and say, I need another 2 weeks, or I need another 3 weeks to pull something together in a data request. And that can be sometimes as simple as providing invoices. Now, if you're a Rev.io customer, you shouldn't have that problem. You should be able to mine that data very, very easily. But still, other items such as how it ties back to your balance sheet and your exemption certificates need to be sure all of those are in place. Again, in the self-review, these gaps can be identified very quickly and easily. I just mentioned the deadlines, of course, meeting those deadlines, being sure we can turn information around, that we can answer questions clearly, that we, as your provider, understand your business, but most importantly, you're able to explain to an auditor what it is on an invoice and how it ties out to what you do as a business. If that is not able to happen, or if there's inaccuracies in the transactions, it's going to very quickly lead to an inaccurate assessment. And what that means is, if you cannot support your data, the auditors will do field testing and do error factors that quantify the amount of assessment you'll have, meaning they look at a few invoices, see $1,000, and they use a multiplier and say it's $20,000 in total assessment over a whole year. So they use estimates. They don't look at every single transaction. So you want to be sure that you can quickly answer any of their questions. Obviously, I'm speaking to you here because I want you to utilize an experienced third-party auditor to work as a mediator between yourself and the auditor. That is very important. I always use it as a comparison to an attorney. If you're giving a deposition, you don't go in to give a deposition by yourself. You bring your attorney. The attorney fields the questions. and is sure that the answers you give are answers that are appropriate to the questions that are being asked. Simply meaning, just as in a deposition, in an audit, you don't want to give more information out to an auditor that could lead them to look for something else or dig deeper into another area. That's what GSA can do for you, is to make sure that you don't get stuck in a situation where you get into further audits. Finally, you want to be sure that anything that you give to the auditor is reviewed thoroughly. And obviously, if you're utilizing GSA as your audit lead, we're running that interference for you. We're going to be sure that everything is relevant to what the question is accurate, answers the question. And in the unfortunate instance that it doesn't, that there's some gap, we're going to try and help you develop as good an answer to maybe mitigate what some of the problems may be. We do have a lot of luck in a lot of cases with situations where data doesn't tie out, and we're able to find ways to explain it in a different way to the auditor and hopefully make some of the problems go away. One other thing I want to mention that's not on the slides is that one of the most critical things to think about in an audit is that most audits that take place are sales tax type audits. There are UUT type audits and obviously USAC audits. And those folks that generally do those audits are versed in telecommunications. They understand the lingo, they understand what you're doing, they understand the concepts. The majority of the audits are related to sales tax, whether at a state or local level. Those auditors, in most cases, have never dealt with a telecom company. They don't understand concepts such as prepaid versus postpaid, tax inclusive versus tax exclusive, things like we've talked today about optimizations, traffic studies. They're totally clueless to what any of those things may mean, and therefore you need to be sure that you've got very good advice to help field the questions from the auditor and explain how telecom works. It sounds very parochial, but sometimes in audits we spend more time explaining to them what our clients do and how it works than really what they're asking about from the audit. So hopefully I have tied together all of this really important information that Samantha and Samuel and Beth have given to you today. And as I mentioned earlier, it's very, very complex. The questions are very complex. And I think this is a good primer for you to get an understanding of what to do, how to do it, how to avoid audits. So that said, I would like to turn it over to Matt LaHood, our CEO.
Thank you, Joe. And thank you to everyone who is participating in this webinar. I am so proud of our team and our company for what we're providing to our customers and what we're presenting to you today. I want to leave a couple of points with you in that what we've talked about today, most companies would think they would have to join our business practice for outsourcing for all of our services. However, several of the products and services that we are going to mention toward the end of this presentation are really the entree into working with GSA. I'll give you a data point. More than half of all the audit defense that we provide are for customers who are using either internal resources for filing or another third party. We're successful in those areas because we're fully capable of handling historical data provided by a third party. Secondly, with the use of Rev.io and the policy capabilities of Rev.io and the tax engines, we're able to go back and look independently upon data that was provided and processed through other entities. So hopefully you've gained a little bit more understanding about our team. You know, there's an axiom that I learned decades ago from an old consultant, and that axiom seems to be appropriate with our company. We seek to serve our customers to the highest and best capability that they'll allow us. We have the consulting services, we have the research tools, and we have the systems that we've invested in and built on our own to support the most sophisticated customers. by doing so, we have the most experienced team and supported by the best-of-breed products systems in the industry. Some of these are third-party systems that we use across all of our customers. Companies constantly come to us and say, you know, what's your sweet spot? And the reality is that GSA probably has created more carriers out of the ground than any service provider out there today in telecommunications. GSA is, by and large, solely devoted to the telecommunications industry. And so we concentrate our knowledge and experience and our resources for the betterment of all of our customers. One thing that we'll be rolling out throughout this year is our advanced asset sell, mergers and acquisition support, due diligence, not only for the acquirer, but also for companies who are seeking an opportunity in the future to perhaps sell or merge their company with someone else. Our ability to do pre-audit reviews through all of the practices that we mentioned today, from traffic study, policy cleanup, to tax policy built into your tax engine, to regulatory footprints and filing that Beth alluded to, that can all be turned towards a company who wants to present their entity and their asset in the best light possible at the time someone might be looking to either merge or purchase. And our sole purpose is to protect the value of your company. As such, I'd like to profile just a few products and services that we have in support of our customers. Most companies believe that licenses are a necessary evil, and so they grudgingly gather licenses in jurisdictions where we're filing. For GSA, licensing is an asset. It's an asset that would be used for transfer and to justify your revenue. I've got some background noise here, I apologize. So we look at it as an asset, and as such, we protect that asset by storing it and recording its renewal process managed by Samantha's team. Secondly, for wholesalers and for those that are providing services that are supported by wholesale carriers, we have RBO Bill Manager, which is a cost tracking tool, and we are shortly, in the near future, going to be announcing revenue assurance exclusively provided to our Rev.io customers. GSA is in the process of testing direct from wholesale, meaning AT&T, Verizon, CenturyLink billing provided via EDI, tracked against contracts, and then validated against your own billing through Rev.io. So that is our cost control and revenue assurance practice. So if you have any concern about whether or not your inputs, meaning what you're purchasing from underlying carriers, is actually relating to revenue, again, I'm sorry I have some background noise. If whoever is conducting that background noise can go on mute, that'd be great. So for those of you that are concerned about perhaps your inputs from underlying carriers not necessarily relating to revenue, we have a solution for you, RBO Bill Manager. And finally, for those wholesale carriers that want to make sure that they're protected from their underlying resellers, their downstream resellers and their business practices, we have RBO Cert Tracker. And that Cert Tracker practice not only stores and provides a renewal process for all reselling agents and reselling carriers who are seeking exemption, but we also have a team that can input the exemption policy right into the customer's CRM, right in Rev.io. These are very instrumental products and services that we've spent years producing for our customers, and I hope that you are encouraged at this point to look them up. These are also presented on our client RBO portal site on our website. Feel free to peruse them. And I want to thank Rev.io for putting this event on. We've attempted through this presentation to answer the most likely and frequently asked questions for companies that are seeking better support for their outsourced compliance. And we hope we've done a good job of giving you a well-rounded presentation today. I'm going to hand it over to Olivia, and who will take it from here. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Matt. On behalf of everyone at Rev.io, I'd like to thank our team at GSA for joining us for the webinar today. We really appreciate the partnership that we built with you all, and we hope that our audience has enjoyed it as well. Before we begin the Q&A portion of the presentation, I'd like to remind our audience that you'll receive the full webinar recording via email within 2 weeks. In addition, if you have submitted any questions during the presentation that don't get addressed during the live Q&A, we will be sure to follow up with you via email. If you haven't submitted your questions and you'd like to do so, now would be a great time to submit them in the GoToWebinar control panel. Now, I'd like to ask a few questions to our presenters, and I'll let you all decide who is best suited to answer each of these. The first question is, what are the optimizations the largest number of your clients put into place?
The optimizations that the largest number of our clients put into place are the three that we talked about: the cost recovery fees, the unbundling, and the traffic studies.
Great.
I would say Olivia, that the greatest impact is the traffic study, because it not only impacts the voice services, which for our customers is becoming a smaller and smaller portion, but the voice service traffic is really the traffic study that is then applied to any interstate product. As Sam mentioned, the common misconception is that the traffic study only affects voice, but it's really any interstate product that is regulated by the FCC. And so it has a greater impact even beyond the voice traffic that you may be experiencing. And so our customers get the greatest bang for their buck, so to speak, in traffic study analysis. And that's why it's becoming a default process for us and our customers as we roll it out. Thank you for that question.
I've got another one here. What data do you need to run an optimization? And by that, he says he means, what do you need to run a traffic study? And also, what are the cost recovered fees?
Well, when it comes to the traffic study and the data that we need, we at GSA have a specific template that we can send you. But what we critically need is the minutes of use. Now, whether it be for the quarter or the entire year. Again, we measure the interstate versus the intrastate off the minutes of use, not revenue. And that is the common misconception that we see, is that we get our carriers who do these studies and it's all based off of total revenue. It's the minutes of use, and if you don't have those records, you can get them from your underlying carrier.
And for the cost recovery fee, the way that we approach the cost recovery fee is we give our customers, our clients, two choices. Either they can tell us what they want to recover based off of some information that they have and they've built that on, or we can go and look at their competitors to help them decide what is an attractive cost recovery fee that doesn't scare away their customers.
Great. Here's another question for you all. Can you discuss VDA's, voluntary disclosure agreements?
Sure, I'll field that. This is Joe. GSA has handled many VDAs for clients, and essentially voluntary disclosures is a process in which a carrier who, either through their discovery or self-review or through our review, is found to have maybe not filed a certain tax, let's say a sales tax in a jurisdiction, for a long period of time, and they believe they have a substantial liability. So what GSA can do is GSA can approach the jurisdiction and initiate a voluntary disclosure process. And in that process, the client, the carrier, stays anonymous to the jurisdiction until an agreement can be made on what the data is, what the liability is, and how we're going to deal with penalties and interest. So it gives the carrier an opportunity to negotiate through a representative like GSA with the jurisdiction to help mitigate some of the penalties and interest. It generally can't reduce the tax, but you can get an opportunity to reduce the penalties and the interest.
Okay, great. Thank you for that answer. And what is a benefit of GSA helping me with exemptions?
As I mentioned, the benefits with exemption assistance is twofold. First of all, we can ensure that you're protected if you were ever audited and you had been presented with exemptions, making sure that they always met the good faith requirements. Secondly, in terms of adding dollars to your bottom line, we can ensure that you're not paying taxes twice, meaning you're not paying your underlying carriers and also paying the jurisdictions on those same taxes.
One point to add, if you haven't caught it, for those of you that are listening, exemptions represents the lowest hanging fruit for an auditor, whether it be at the state or federal level. Should you be exempting some of your revenue, they're going to take a look at your P&L and they're going to identify wholesale revenue, and they're going to ask you to defend that revenue via exemptions and specific reporting. Thanks to Rev.io and their tax engine support, along with our coupling it with Cert Tracker, we have the ability to quickly defend any of our customers. And if you have any queasiness about whether or not your exemptions are up to date, this is one of the easiest projects for us to engage in customers who are not using us for their own compliance.
Great. And then I think the last question here that I have for you all today is, what types of license administration does GSA perform?
I'm glad you saved that question for last, Olivia, because it is just that is such a great question to end on. We handle licenses for all different types of authority levels, meaning we can start with the Secretary of State to make sure that you're actually qualified to do business in a state. So getting started at that very top level is often confusing for a lot of our clients because they've heard different advisement from different types of tax or regulatory advisors. And sometimes those advisements don't speak directly to telecommunications and how Nexus is established for telecommunications. Secondly, we assist with PUC licensing, meaning if you're a traditional plain old telephone service provider and you need a CLEC in a state, all the way to you just need to make sure that you have all your wireless registrations or notifications sent to the state. We can ensure that's done. We also handle licenses at the DOR level as well as all the local jurisdictions. And when I say we handle those, I mean we actually register you. We complete the whole process, ensuring that the taxes are effectively released if we're filing those taxes for you, to make sure there's no gaps in reporting. Most importantly, we also handle those renewals if you will let us. We make sure that you don't continue to get notices about years worth of renewals that you have not filed with jurisdictions, leading you to pay more money in a jurisdiction than you're potentially even billing your customers.
Great. Thank you all for joining us today. I hope you found the content worthwhile, and we would love to see you next time. If you have any other questions, you can follow up with either Rev.io or GSA directly. We'll be sure to respond to your questions in a timely manner. And with that, I'd like to thank our presenters today for joining us.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.